this style of interview is still growing. If you were in the position of giving me advice, what would you do? Would you really tell me to stop at this point? Hey everyone, it's your boy. I'm back. And so today I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about coding interviews and LeetCode. Why do they still exist? Let's take a look at a tweet. And this is actually a few months old, from October of last year. And I actually saw this from our old friend, Clement. I'm not sure if any of you remember that exchange we had a couple years ago. But anyways, the tweet is by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I don't want to risk getting it wrong, but he has a pretty big social media following, not only on Twitter, but on other socials as well. He previously was, I believe, like an engineering manager at Uber, and he has honestly a lot more industry experience than I do. So this is what his take was, and he was responding to somebody else's tweet who had, I think, like a legitimate point to some extent. I think this is like an argument that I've briefly talked about a couple times on this channel, and it's an argument that comes up a lot when it comes to LeetCode. Now, to be honest, I don't really know who this person is, but I assume they have a lot of experience. And what they say is everybody hates these whiteboard coding tests that people are forced to take in interviews, and for good reason. The main problem is that they tell you absolutely nothing useful. When I'm hiring, I want to hire people who will integrate well with the teams, who have demonstrated their ability to learn, who are creative and show some initiative, who can communicate effectively in code and English. I'm looking for a contributor, not a code monkey. I don't really care if they can pull code out of their heads like a rabbit. That's a learnable skill. Software development is primarily a social activity nowadays, so I'm also screening for soft skills. The whiteboard tests are telling me that you're hiring somebody to work alone in a cave where they'll throw a slab of meat whenever they get hungry. And I think the rest of it is just kind of rambling or yapping. He had a funny phrase right at the end. He said, "Dump those Mickey Mouse code writing games into the trash where they belong." And the problem I have with giving my opinion on this is that obviously I have some biases, and I'm going to briefly talk about those. I'm going to talk about other people's biases. I'm going to talk about a few different things, and I'll try to put them into a coherent video. But the first thing I just want to tell you is LeetCode interviews, as of now, they're actually not decreasing. To my surprise, to my own surprise, LeetCode interviews are still a thing. It's 2025. LeetCode interviews are still a thing. And I'm not just saying that. I swear to you, here's some data if you don't believe me. This is public data. If you go to Google Trends and you search for LeetCode, take a look at the graph. Let me move my camera. But this is public data. I'm not making this up. So you can see here, LeetCode's been growing. Back when I left my job at Google, and I think that was when ChatGPT first came out, or at least it first became popular at the end of 2022. And look what happened. If I had given up, if I had stopped working on LeetCode, which a lot of people told me, I can go to some of the comments. People told me, just stop. It's over. LeetCode is dead. You're coping if you keep doing it. And if I had listened to them, I would have stopped here, but I didn't. I just kept going, and things have just been continuing to go. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to continue forever, but GPT-4 came out, still increasing. The newest models that came out, I can't even name what they are. Look, it's still increasing. LeetCode is still growing. This style of interview is still growing. Now, who knows? Maybe this line will completely drop off at some point. At some point, it probably will. Maybe 10 years from now, 5 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter. It's really hard to tell. If you were in the position of giving me advice, what would you do? Would you really tell me to stop at this point? I don't think that would be the strategic move. Okay, so for whatever reason, this type of interview has not gone away yet. In my opinion, I haven't really seen major signs of it diminishing either. Big companies are still doing this style of interview, as much as many people hate it. And so our other friend here had a very different opinion on this. And so I guess before I give my opinion, let me give this counter opinion as well. Here's the uncomfortable truth. It doesn't matter that whiteboard coding tests or LeetCode don't measure a lot of things a dev needs to do day to day. They are the currently known most economical filter to hire at scale. I'm talking when you hire 100 plus devs per year or 1,000. And obviously in big tech's case, probably over 10,000 a year, easily over 10,000 a year. Hiring is done by people who are devs themselves, and you want to keep a similar bar between different parts of the org. Yes, tasks that simulate day-to-day work give better signal, but they require larger investment and it's problematic when the question leaks. When you do more than 20 to 30 interviews with the same question, expect it to leak and be Googleable when people search for what your hiring process is. With algorithmic questions, it makes no difference if it leaks, given companies have a question bank in the hundreds. A nice side effect for large companies is they self-select for people who are willing to put up with BS things, aka spend considerable amount of time to do something mostly pointless. Prepare for these algorithm interviews just because it's how things work and what it takes to get the job. Those who refuse to do this would likely not be a fit for these environments where these interviews are the first or last things that are process you follow just because. And I'll finish the rest of this, but let me just kind of interject for a bit and say, there's very much some truth to that. For example, let's say you're a dev, you have 10 years of industry experience. Maybe it's startup experience, you like moving fast, you like building things, and you don't really care about algorithms or low-level things like that. And now you want to get a job at big tech. Well, let me just tell you, if you're not willing to do 100 LeetCode problems to prepare for the interview to get in, you're really going to hate the job as well, because I don't know how it works at all of the big tech companies, but I'm pretty sure at most of them, a lot of the skills that you have to learn, you do it on the job. And let me tell you, it's really not fun. I don't know who finds changing config files, who likes learning about a lot of like super esoteric knowledge, like in my opinion, just like a completely different way of doing things at like a certain company. They just have a certain way of doing things. And there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of overhead, there's a lot of like things in the way. And like LeetCode, in my humble opinion, is the least of the problems. I mean, it's a pain in the ass, it's stressful, sure, but the job, even though it's quite different than the interview, there's still like plenty of things wrong with the job as well. But anyways, and make no mistake, these places screen for soft skills, teamwork, etc. These are done via recruiter screen, hiring manager interviews, to some extent architecture and bar raiser. Very good point. Obviously, the coding interview isn't just done like, it's not like exactly an online assessment. It's not exactly a standardized test that people just take, pass or fail, and then just get in. There's a lot more involved in that. And those are some of the things that I actually struggled with when I was trying to get hired. But to finish this, the coding interview is usually 1 or 2 out of 5 to 6 interviews. And the coding part is usually the most trivial to pass for anyone putting in the effort to prep. See the point on putting up with the most pointless stuff the job asks for. The problem is not that big tech uses these hiring processes. It makes perfect sense for them. It's when small companies hiring 5 to 10 people per year copy it without thinking. More on how to build a sensible hiring process without blindly copying it. And he links to his newsletter, which I would recommend people checking out. Like, he's a good content creator. I think he's one of the good ones. Very like genuine person. He makes a couple more points in the replies. He wouldn't be surprised if like in-person interviews come back, because there actually has been a lot more people cheating lately. It's gotten a lot easier to do that. But it was honestly always pretty easy to cheat. People did it a lot more than you think, and some people even admitted to doing it. So I'm not trying to like a snitch or anything, but there's this video, and it's a public video. It's like 6 years old now, from old school YouTuber Joma. And here's like a 10-second like clip from this video where he was being, pretty brutally honest. That's one of the things I always liked about Joma.
Nice. But I also actually had a call does something different. They make you do a coding challenge.
Oh, I didn't have that.
And I just Googled the coding challenge and I found it and I just I just fucking copy pasted it and it was totally fine.
Actually, I remember.
Yeah, so I think one of the arguments that people make a lot is everybody is cheating. Like, these interviews suck. Everybody just cheats through the interviews. People say it as if it's a new thing. People say like, well, with ChatGPT, it can solve all the LeetCode problems. People been cheating. People have been cheating. It's very easy to cheat. Like, there's so many ways to cheat, and it's not like it was hard back then either. Like, you heard what he said. He just Googled it and he found it, and that was it. How do you stop something like that? How do you stop leaking? Well, with online assessments, it's practically impossible because those are like fully automated. But once you get to the human phase, it's pretty hard to cheat through that. I'm pretty sure like you could have all the cheating resources available to you. If I was interviewing you, it'd be so obvious because I'm not going to ask you just write a loop. I'm going to ask you like questions to see how deeply you understand the code that you've written. And if you don't understand it, if you can't tell me what would happen if I removed 1 or 2 lines of code, then you don't understand it. And I think that'd be pretty hard for you to ChatGPT through that. So now finally, let me give a few of my thoughts. And to do that, we have to answer the age-old question of, does size matter? Specifically, in this case, we are talking about company size. And that's something that people just really seem to ignore with this LeetCode interview argument. And we saw from those 2 tweets, it's very relevant in my opinion. Sure, if you have a small company, maybe 100 people total, you have a lot more freedom and control over the interview process. But as you scale, as you get more and more people, I guess it's better to differentiate between small and big. Things change. Like, it does matter. The size does matter. It changes the equation. And whatever you say about like the big tech hiring process, so far, it seems to be working. I mean, I don't have any internal data on the companies. Maybe things are changing. Maybe they have certain data that is changing in either direction. But I mean, over the last 10, 15 years, this interview process has created companies worth trillions of dollars. There are legitimate flaws that have been pointed out. There are legitimate flaws in this process. But you could say that about anything. There's flaws with everything. Every software has buggy code. It has bugs. There's problems with every team. There's always problems, but it does work. That's the point of interviews. Hire people that are good. Now, sure, with a like smaller company, you can have a better interview process. And what are we talking about when we say better or worse? Let's kind of think about that as well. Like, let's say you have a circle of candidates. Like, this is everybody. And let's say that only a certain percentage of these, let's say a quarter, are like good candidates. And honestly, it's probably a lot less than that. I should make this smaller. I should say 10% because, I mean, my God, most people are awful. They're genuinely awful. And some people know it and some people don't even know it. Like, they think they're good and they're just not. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but I just genuinely believe that. I just think that it's just true. But let's say you have like a certain percentage of these people that are good. Like, these are the people that you want to hire. Now, I think that the interview process, like the current interview process, let's put it in orange, it intersects with this. And it doesn't get everybody. That's the problem, that it actually doesn't capture everybody in this circle. And it also probably captures some people outside of that circle as well. But my argument is that it looks more like this, like maybe it's something like that, versus other people probably think it looks like this or maybe like that, where there's like not a lot of intersection. And the reason that this is important is because we're getting to the question of like, what are good hires and bad hires? If I have an interview process that looks like this, once in a while, maybe I'll get some people that aren't good. Maybe I'll get a small percentage of bad hires, like let's say 10% bad hires, or maybe 20%. But 80% of people, most people through this process are going to be good. Now, the problem is there's a lot of good people that this interview process is missing out on. Now, in my opinion, if you're a good developer, there's no way that you can't get reasonably good at LeetCode. I mean, sometimes it is pretty hard. Like, some of these interview questions are pretty insane. Companies definitely have different like levels that they're looking for and stuff like that. But I mean, most people can learn this stuff. Now, is it a time waster? Yeah, sure. But I think that's kind of where we get to like the biases that people have. The reason, I think the biggest reason people complain about this process, the interview process, it's just because they hate it. They hate LeetCode. If they didn't hate LeetCode, why would they complain? And I personally like LeetCode. So, that's my bias. I like solving these kinds of puzzles. I'm decently good at it. So obviously I'm going to be biased in the other direction. Now, if the interview process does change, I would be willing to adapt to it. But anyways, this is just how the game is currently played. The goal of these companies is not to hire everybody that's a good developer. It's just to make sure that the people that they do hire are pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. They're pretty smart. They can learn things quickly. And if you can get good at algorithms and data structures, I really don't see how almost anything on the job would be impossible for you to learn. If you can do some of these crazy algorithms, what specifically about the job is going to be too difficult for you, at least in terms of technical things, like which database, which SQL query is going to be the one that, just blows your mind. Sure, there's plenty of difficult things in development, but the difficulty from those things, in my opinion, comes more from like experience rather than how smart you are. That's what this process is trying to do. Just have a good enough way to hire people that are at least good enough. Basically, like standardized tests work in school. Now, a problem with this, I think, when it comes to like the size, is that small companies copied the big companies. With big companies, when people start copying each other, sometimes they don't even know why they're doing it. Like if you're at an airport or something and you see a bunch of people, you get off your plane, you see everybody walking in a certain direction, you're probably going to follow them if you have no idea what to do. And that's what most companies did. They just kind of copied this process. Now, if you are a small company and you're doing interviews this way and you can't figure out a better way to interview people for your specific company, and you look for the specific skills that are going to be relevant to your specific company, then there's something wrong with you. Like you should not be doing LeetCode interviews if you have a small company. I've interviewed plenty of people, and for LeetCode, obviously LeetCode skills are relevant. And even I didn't ask people for LeetCode interviews. It's a lot easier to tell who's a good hire and who's not, even for me. Now, there was like LeetCode was a portion of that, but yeah, anyways. So like people start copying and they don't even know why they're doing it. But that does not mean that big companies should necessarily change. Let me tell you a little bit about something called inertia. Anytime you change something, we don't always know what the effect is going to be. Like in software development, we do experiments and kind of test the changes with feature flags or something, and then measure the metrics and like the changes that happened. So anytime you have something, you don't know, is it going to be a positive change or is it actually going to maybe make the process even worse? At least with the current process, like the companies, they know what the current process is. They have metrics on it, and I don't know what those metrics are, but as long as the interviews are still being pretty good and they're getting pretty good hires, why would they change the process? They really don't have a reason to change it. There are plenty of higher priority things that companies could actually be working on. And obviously, if you have a better idea, why don't you try to sell it to big tech? If you do have a sort of standardized process, which is that's what big tech is looking for. They're looking for standardized, because interviewers at companies, at big companies and probably at small companies too, nobody likes interviewing. Even I didn't really like interviewing that much. I mean, I kind of liked it just because like I like algorithms, but it's painful going through interviews because most people fail the interview, and within the first 5 minutes if the person is going to pass or fail. And usually like 90% of the time, they're not going to pass. And then you have to sit through the next 45 minutes. And it's just really painful. People hate interviewing so much. People want to code. People want to build. They don't want to like hold somebody's hand through like a 45-minute interview, at least most of the time. But yeah, anyways, like if you have a better idea, a startup idea, where you think that you could make standardized interviews that are actually better, you should try to sell it to big tech, because you'll probably make a lot of money by doing this. And I know of many companies, I know of many people that are actually trying to do this right now, and we'll have to see if they turn out to be successful or not. But just doing like a few thought experiments for a second. If you would not, like right now, if you're listening to this and you really hate LeetCode interviews and you think there's a better way, then you should definitely start a company. And if you're not willing to do that, you have to ask yourself why. I think probably the biggest reasons would be you probably think that it won't work. And even if you think it will work, you think that the risk is just way too high. And if you think the risk is way too high, what do you think the big companies are thinking? Do you think they're just all of a sudden just going to abandon everything that's mostly been working so far? Now, what actually makes hiring good? Well, one very good way of hiring people is hiring people that were interns at the company, because like one of the tweets that we read earlier said, that's the best way to test people. Pay them for a little bit, have them do some temporary work, see how well they work with you. And then you have like a very good test of whether a person can actually perform at the job or not. That's great, but obviously that's very expensive. That's a lot more expensive than doing like an interview. And I'm not just talking about from the money perspective. Paying the intern however much money they make, 10K, 20K, 30K over a summer, honestly, the companies don't care so much about that. They care about the time investment in the interns. Unless you're a rock star, and rock star interns are very much worth paying for. If you're only getting paid this much for a summer internship and you're an actual rock star, you're getting underpaid. But that's kind of what I mean. Like, you have to weigh the pros and cons. Like, this is a very viable and good path, and companies will definitely continue doing this. But this is not like infinitely scalable. But moreover, like, hiring is just expensive in general. Another good way would be hire people you know. So like people that you've already worked with in the past. And that's hard to do. Like, that kind of requires like networking, and like getting started with something like that is the hardest part. But another thing that I've seen lately, and this has been a thing for a while, but people getting hired via social media. You see it a lot, especially on Twitter. You see somebody who is posting in public, like just on their Twitter, talking about things, talking to random people about something they were interested in, just building stuff over the years. And people take notice, and then they eventually get hired, or they start their own company, or something like that happens. Like, for example, this guy who, to be honest, I'm not like super familiar with him. I follow him and he follows me. He is working on a startup right now. He's a very young guy. I won't call him like a kid because I don't want to like be insulting, but he's very young. I think he's like 19 or 20 or something like that. And I don't know his full story, but I've seen him posting on Twitter for the last like couple of years, I think at least. He's probably been doing it longer than that. He just enjoys coding. He does stuff that he enjoys. He talks about it online. He does things that are genuinely useful for people, and people take notice. And then all of a sudden you have opportunities. I can tell you, this person, almost certainly he's gotten job offers for people just because of his Twitter. And it's not like he's posting fake things on Twitter. I think when I give this sort of advice, a lot of people take it in like a transactional way. Like, you just have to check the boxes and then life is great and then you'll get hired. You have to be genuine to some extent, which isn't easy. Like, you can't fake this type of passion, but you can like sort of cultivate it by doing things that you find enjoyable, putting them out there, connecting with other people who have like similar thoughts, and just being passionate, being genuinely good at what you do, proving it to people. If you do that, like, people will hire you. I can tell you, I would hire this guy on the spot. I wouldn't even think about it. I'm sorry I called him this guy the whole time. He obviously has a name, Aiden. So sorry, Aiden. But anyways, those are some of my thoughts on this. I tried to keep it coherent. I don't know how it actually ended up. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like me trying to predict the future, I honestly have no clue. But this is just kind of my thought process on this. I don't really know how a lot of the companies are seeing this right now, but from what I can see, things don't seem like they're changing just yet.